we jump into the opening talk of the day, I will go through some of the housekeeping basics with you. So our sessions will last approximately 1 hour with a dedicated Q&A block at the end. We will be keeping an eye on the chat, so feel free to send your questions anytime you wish. We are all here to learn from the experiences of our speakers, so please be kind to each other and please do not spam the chat. If you have to leave early, don't worry, the session is being recorded and will be available on Wacom YouTube page in the following days. Those of you who have registered will also receive a follow-up email with summary and additional information during next week. But who we are. This event is brought to you by, well, Wacom, obviously, and our sponsor, MSI. For those of you who know Wacom, welcome back. It's so nice to see you all again. And for those of you who are new here, Wacom has been around for some odd 40 years, and we are the pioneers of digital pen input technology. Whenever you want to create on your computer and you realize that using a mouse or a trackpad just don't cut it, you should try using a digital pen. You will find it much, much better. As I said, Wacom Career Days is also sponsored by MSI. MSI is a world leader in content creation, business, and gaming solutions. Bolstered by its cutting-edge R&D capabilities and customer-driven innovation, MSI has a wide-ranging global presence spanning over 120 countries. The company started 35 years ago as a hardware provider with a focus on highly performant mainboards. But within the last years and decades, the company developed heavily by continuously expanding the product portfolio and improving the existing solutions. With its years of technological expertise and a never-ending drive for innovation, MSI managed to satisfy the needs of all types of end users. By now, the product line includes, but not limited to, notebooks, desktop computers, monitors, components, and chassis. The MSI content creation series laptops, like the Creator 15 and Creator 17, give full creative power on the go. And at the office, the Creator P100X or Prestige P100 content creation PCs give amazing stationary power for professional workloads, also supported by the Creator and Prestige series content creation monitors. MSI's newest content creation hardware is not only powerful enough for even the most demanding creator tasks, but it is also known for its pleasing and award-winning designs. Well, to learn more, you can simply visit de.msi.com. Let's go to the final advertising slide. To show our appreciation to all of you who have taken the time to be here with us today, we have an outstanding offer for you. By using the discount code CAREER20 in Wacom Europe and UK eStore, you can get 20% discount on our top products, including the Wacom Cintiq and Cintiq Pro families, the multiple award-winning Wacom Intuos Pro family, our newest 13-inch pen display Wacom One, and our exceptional all-in-one pen computer Wacom Mobile Studio Pro. This is a limited time offer, so you don't want to miss it. And don't forget, the code is CAREER20. Well, finally, it's time to start. My name is Onur, and I will be your host and moderator today. And in this session, we have Alex as our speaker. Alex is a professional retoucher of more than 5 years, and he's been working as a digital nomad for studios around the world. He has a unique style through insight into different markets and cultures, and obviously, he is much, much more than I can put into 3 bullet points. So I will stop talking now, and let's enjoy Alex's presentation.
Well, hello everybody. I'm glad you all made it. Thank you, Onur, for introducing me so nicely. And yes, thanks to all of you for being here. I hope that the insight that I'm about to share is interesting for all of you. And just to quickly go over what I'm going to talk about today, I named my talk, basically, It's All About You. And I will get, of course, more in depth into it, what I mean by that. But it's basically how in this day and age, you are more than the techniques you use. You are more than the hardware you use. And it's all about you as an artist when it comes to freelancing. And in connection with all of that, I will tell you a little bit more about me and how I got into freelance retouching, because it wasn't like a straight career path. It was like a winding road of things I did to get where I am now. Excuse me. And then we go into it, what I mean actually with it's all about you. And then what I think is interesting for all of you guys that are getting into freelancing in the creative industry, how do you get started? What are the first steps you have to take to get clients, to get work? How do you go about presenting your portfolio? How do you get a portfolio in the first place? And then after that, we go into self-marketing, which I mean directly ties into the first, like the point before that, but then a little bit more on how you can connect with people in the industry, connect with clients, get collaborations, and also how to use social media to your advantage, or if you should use social media. And then one thing that's very important to me, and I think isn't talked about very often in the end, work-life balance as a freelancer, because as a freelancer, I don't have to tell you that you're working quite a lot, but it's also very important to take some time off and to take care of yourself. But as I said, we go into that later on. So let me just start telling you a little bit more about me. So as Ono already told you, and as you may have seen in this video, I'm a commercial retoucher. So I'm working in advertising. I'm focused on beauty and fashion. So I work for a lot of magazines. I have a bunch of magazine covers. I do advertising for, I would say, high-profile clients. And I also travel while I work. Being a digital nomad, so to say, is I'm able to work everywhere in the world, basically. All I need is a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection, just to put it simply. So I took advantage of that. And for the past 7 years, I'm doing retouching professionally. I traveled to, I don't know, I worked, for example, like 2 months in Cape Town. Then I traveled to LA and worked a few weeks there. And I did this basically over the whole year and then got back, had my clients here in Germany. I'm from Germany, by the way. So yeah, I really took advantage of this digital nomad lifestyle. And I think it helped me a lot building my business. And I will go over that in the points where I talk about clients and getting clients and all of that. But I think it maybe makes me unique in a way that I have insight in a lot of different things, not just the industry, but also the people that I'm working with, which I think is very important. So yeah, how did I start it in the creative industry? So as I said, I wasn't really getting out of school and being like, okay, I'm going to be a retoucher. I never even thought about it in the first place. And I actually have a background in media design. So after school, I did a training as a media designer. And the question I often get at my socials is, do you need to do a training? And I wouldn't say you don't need necessarily, because just like even with university, and I will get into that later as well, nobody ever asked me for my degree, at least in my place. So everything I'm going to talk to you about is my own experience. So it might work for you. It might be applicable to your situation, but it also might not. So just keep that in mind. So you don't necessarily need to do a training, but it gives you the chance to try things, and it gives you new input that you maybe wouldn't have gotten otherwise. If you like that input, that's the other question, or maybe it doesn't get you anywhere closer to what you want to do, but maybe it helps you finding your way. And this is much more true when it comes to university. So after I did my training, I started working as a junior designer at an agency. And I also started studying graphic design. And I always wanted to be an art director. And I wanted to be like in print design, especially. And then again, do you need to go to university? And the same thing applies that I just said about the training. You don't need to, but it gives you the chance to experiment and find your way in the creative industry. So my story is that, as I said, I started as a graphic designer in university. And then I was very lucky that the university where I was studying had a photo studio. And nobody was using that photo studio. And I was like, I had an assignment in photo class, and I was just going into the photo studio to try out some things. I watched some YouTube videos, and some tutorials on how to get started in studio photography, and did my assignment in studio, although I've never been in a studio before. And if there wouldn't have been this studio at my university, I would have probably never gotten into photography. So that's the kind of input I'm talking about that you sometimes just need to get from external sources. And then during studying, I completely changed my focus from graphic design to photography. Let me just scroll through my notes. I'm sorry. So yeah, in general, the time in university is where you lay the groundwork for your career. You getting all the basics. You get little pieces of information about all the aspects of the industry, and it's your time to learn and soak up as many things as you possibly can, even if you may not use them later on in your freelancing career. But it's still good to know about things. For example, when you're a graphic designer, it's good to know a little bit of photography, or maybe a little bit of product design. Or when you're a retoucher, it helps tremendously to know anything about photography and also graphic design. Because in the end, especially if you're working in a commercial environment like I do, it helps me so much to know about graphic design, because I know what graphic designers are looking for. For example, that they need extended backgrounds to put slogans or graphics or whatever. And of course, you get all this in a brief, but just having it in your head already helps you so much. And it's the same thing for almost every aspect of the creators industry. Knowing things that you are surrounded with, because especially the creative industry is a very collaborative community. So it's always good to know what the other people are doing. So, and of course, in university and also when you're doing a training, you get to know the basics of the hardware and software that you're using, because most of the stuff we're doing these days is digital. So you do have a lot to learn when it comes to software like Photoshop, Capture One, whatever else is out there in design, or even video editing software. And what I did during my training was, when I switched over from graphic design to photography, I used the time between semesters to actually do an internship with a commercial photographer in my hometown, because I wanted to see, okay, I like photography and I like taking pictures, but could I imagine doing it as a profession? Because things change quite a bit if you have to do a certain thing. So if it's your hobby, that's one thing, but then turning that hobby into a profession actually does something with your mind, because all of a sudden you have to do the thing that you enjoy so much doing. So I just wanted to know for myself, okay, is this something I could imagine doing, I mean, ideally for the rest of my life, or at least for a big part that follows after university. So I did my training, my internship with this photographer, and I can just only encourage you to do the same thing when you're early on in your career, because you're, again, not only learning about the thing that you want to do and then you want to make money with, but there's just so much around, for example, photography. You go into planning, into production, into like the most basic thing, like building sets, cleaning lenses, cleaning multiple cameras, dealing with clients. For example, if you're on a production and you're an assistant, you also have to take care of clients. So the social aspect of yourself and your personality, it grows as well as your skill set. So I did this internship in my semester break, and then again as a practical semester later on, where I paused my studying and then went to the same photographer to assist him for another 8 months. So in total, I had like about a year worth of actual work experience. And that combined with me working as a graphic designer right next to studying, because I actually had to have a job to afford studying, kind of left me with both things. I had time to experiment and I learned things at university, but at the same time, I got work experience, which is, I would say, about the most important thing when it comes to working in the creative industry, because you only learn from experience. That can be a good experience if something goes just well. It can also be a bad experience if something goes wrong, which is equally important. So I would just use that time at university and, as again, like a sponge, basically just soak up everything that's happening around you, and then actively go out there and try other things that may be out of your comfort zone or that's something maybe you haven't thought about doing. And then you notice, oh my God, I enjoy this. I want to do that. So I think that's what's perfect about the time at university. And it's kind of the time to fill your tool bag prior to becoming a freelance artist. This doesn't mean that you have to master anything. I think nobody is expecting you to come out of university and be the best at something. But you should be good at a lot of things, and then you can like refine your skill with the knowledge you're gaining when you're actually working. All right, so my talk is, I named It's All About You. I know this is very clickbaity, but let me tell you what I mean with that. The creative industry is a very crowded field, which can be a good and a bad thing. But for example, in retouching or in photography, there are like cheaper cameras, the hardware and software is very accessible. And especially during this time in the pandemic, working from home is very attractive. Or it's something that you have to do. So it leads to a lot of people wanting to have a creative job, which in itself is great, but it makes it very hard to stand out when you're offering a service or as an artist. And when it comes down to it, especially, let me just talk about retouching here. Everybody's basically using the same tools. So we're all using the same hardware and the same software. In Germany, we have a saying that's called "Es kochen alle nur mit Wasser," which roughly translates to everybody's cooking with water. So when everybody has the same tools and the same software at their disposal, how do you stand out as an artist? And the only way to stand out is that you stand out. That it's the person that is using the tools that's the most important. And it doesn't matter which camera you're using, it doesn't matter which PC you're using, or if you're on a Mac, and it doesn't matter, sorry, Wacom, it doesn't matter which Wacom you're using. It's you are doing the work. You are a craftsman, basically. So how you use these tools and how you use the software, that's what's important. So the most important part in the beginning is building your aesthetics. I like this word a little bit more than style, because I always feel like style is something that is given to you externally. I think nobody should be like, okay, my style is going to be this and that. But the way you see things and the way you like things, it's for building your very own, like maybe like a business card of your aesthetic and what you like and what is represented in your work. So that's something that you should hone and refine and work on that. And it also doesn't necessarily mean that your work has to be like tremendously different from everybody else's out there. I mean, it definitely does help if you're specialized and maybe you're doing something that nobody else does. I mean, of course, this helps you to stand out, but also when, for example, in retouching, there's so much more of like these soft skills in the background. For example, are you reliable? Are you professional above all else? Are you able to meet your deadlines no matter what? Are you always having a solution instead of offering problems? So these things are also amazing. I mean, they are like very important because, like, for example, an agency may work with, I don't know, a handful of retouchers at a time for different projects. And if all their quality of work is the same, but one of them is like very nice, it's easy to get on calls with him or her, and they're always on time, they're asking the right questions without taking up too much of their time, who do you think they're going to work with more and more? So always keep that in mind, that the soft skills are equally important as your skills in general. Excuse me for 1 second. One thing you're not used to when you're a retoucher is talking a lot, so I'm sorry about that. Yeah, especially, as I said, it's very important to be flexible, and also it's very important to be professional, but also flexible. For example, I had a client that I contacted via email, and I actually wanted to ask him for product shots that were still missing in my portfolio. And he was like, no, I have some beauty shots that you could tag off. I'm like, okay, cool. And I actually wanted to build a business relationship with those guys. But then after I did this test job for them, I never heard from them again for a few months. But then I got a call the other day, like 3 months later, that was way back in the beginning of my career. I think it was like after 1.5 years of me doing retouching professionally. And he called me and was like, we need somebody to retouch on set in Cape Town for about 7 days. Could you do it? I was like, hell yeah, of course. When do we start? And then as soon as I hung up, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I wasn't anywhere near ready to do this, especially now in hindsight. I was just like, holy frick, that was a gamble taking that job. But it went amazingly well. I was very well prepared. I did my homework. And again, I also was just very lucky to get this call, and that also nothing went wrong during this job. But that's what I mean with flexibility. I mean, of course, this might have been once in a lifetime thing, and this might not happen to you, but you can break it down to all other things. That I'm always advocating for the thing that you should never say no to something you may not know or familiar about it, because if you have the right mindset, you can learn almost anything in time. And then with today's industry being so collaborative, you will probably be able to find somebody who may be able to help you out on the job, being like, okay, I got this job, it's my client, but maybe I know that you're more proficient with that thing, so maybe we could do it together. If you maybe don't have the time, or it's so far off from what you do that it's not possible for you to learn it or adapt to the situation very quickly. So that's always something that you should keep in mind, that you should be flexible. Yeah. Let's just talk more about me at the moment, because I came up with this, it's all about you. And I was trying to think about what made me stand out, because I actually feel like I'm not doing anything when it comes to retouching. I'm not doing anything like super special. I get asked a lot on my socials what techniques I use. I'm like, the most basic techniques everybody's using for retouching. It's not like I have this magical bucket of stuff I put on my graphic tablets and all of a sudden it's just pure magic. So the reason I have a very stable client base and long-term client base is that I'm always try to be professional, that I'm always try to be reliable, because I think that's the number one thing, especially in a commercial environment where there's a lot of money involved. You don't want to be that guy that just messes up something. And also, I think it's about building your work personality, and this involves sometimes saying no to things. I mean, I know a few minutes ago I just said you should never say no to anything, but some clients just have very not so clever ideas, and then standing your ground and being like, I don't think this is a very good idea, but maybe we should try the other way. So indirectly saying no. We're coming to the proper way of saying no later on in the work-life balance section, because I think it is still important to say no very strictly from time to time. But yeah. And in general, also my commitment when it comes to traveling, or my readiness to travel, and also my background in almost everything that is my job. For example, if you are a retoucher, you're always somehow dealing with photography. So because I have a background in that, I know a lot about photography, about lighting. And I also have this knowledge of like the whole agency side of things, like building print ads, doing something for web and all of that. So I can understand briefs really quickly, and I can adapt to what is asked of me. And I think this also helped me a lot gaining the trust of my clients. So again, you are not the sum of the hardware and the techniques you're using and all of that stuff. It's how you work with the things that you have at your disposal and how you work with other people that's so insanely important in this day and age, where also, like, for example, if you're doing something on social media, while our industry is very big, it also isn't. So bad things will go around very quickly, and so will good things. So if somebody, like word of mouth these days, it's just like it can open you so many doors, but it also can close a lot of them. So that's also something you should always keep in mind. With all of that said, everything I just told you comes from my experience from doing this professionally for more than 7 years and being in the industry with all of my time studying, all of my time being in training. I think it's more than 10 years. So I know all of this now. So if you feel like, oh my God, I didn't know this, and maybe you're panicking because you all didn't know that, or you're like, this is so much to think about, and that is perfectly fine, because if you're starting out as a freelancer, you're just starting out. You're not supposed to know all of this. That's why we do these kinds of webinars and talks to help you guys out with these kinds of things. So you don't have to go through, 10 years of experience in the creative industry, but you get these like little tips, and then it's okay not to be perfect in the beginning. I think that's very important, because especially, for example, if you're on Instagram, and let's just stay with my Instagram. If you see a post that I do and you're like, holy shit, I hope that's what you're thinking. Holy shit, that's good retouching. I'm not as good. And then I would ask you, for how long are you doing it? For example, I had this guy the other day who messaged me like, my retouching isn't as good as yours, and I'm practicing for 6 months. I'm like, dude, come back to me in 4 years. It's all a process. You will never be at the end of your creative journey. You never truly master anything. It's all a path, and it's all a process of constantly learning, adapting, evolving. And that's just something you have to accept. And also, I think that's the beauty of the thing we do, because we are constantly challenged to try new things and come up with new things. And I think that's what's really great about the creative industry. All right, now let's get into how to actually start a freelancing business. Just give me one more second. So I actually started freelancing while I was still in university, because, as I said, to be able to afford rent and everything, I needed to have a job on the side. So I was actually starting to work with an agency and also getting some random personal clients for whom I did some graphic design work in the beginning, and also then later on photography gigs. This actually helped me, again, to pay my rent and also to get into the mindset of being a freelancer. So I never questioned it going full on freelance after I was done with university. So, but when you are done with university and you actually have to make a full-on living with what you're doing, you have to change your pricing structure quite a bit, because once you're done with university, there are so many more things you have to think about that nobody at university will probably ever tell you. And this is all the boring stuff like taxes, healthcare, of course, rent, but also your gear and all of that stuff. So what's the best way to start a freelancing career after, for example, university? And I would say there are like two main roads that you could choose. The first one is maybe get a side job, like a part-time job or even a full-time job. And for example, in an agency as a graphic designer, or assisting a photographer, or maybe even assisting a retoucher in a studio. And use this fixed income that you get from a job like this to pay for all your expenses, like rent, healthcare, taxes, and all of that. And then use the time on the side, if you have any. And I mean, you have to make time if you want to go the freelancing route, and build your business on the side. There's a good thing about this, that is that you don't have to worry about paying your rent and maybe having to sleep under a bridge if you have a bad month. But what I think is not ideal about the situation, that having a fixed income can also make you very lazy. And you have to be very ambitious, and you have to have a lot of drive to, for example, if you're working in an agency for 8 hours, then you have to spend more time after that into your own business. So getting your business off the ground that way can actually take longer than you would choose the second road, which I basically chose, and that is directly starting into freelancing. I mean, what can go wrong with that? I don't have to tell you, because if you don't work, you don't make money, and you can't afford rent. And that's a bad thing. But the thing is that you actually have to do the thing to earn money. So you will probably put in much more time into it. And also there's always this sense of urgency, because like, okay, I need a job this month to be able to afford my expenses. So my story is actually a little bit of both. I know I just said I did the second route, but what I mean with that is that it was always clear for me that I'm going to be a freelancer. I never even questioned it. Just working a 9 to 5, even if it's in the creative industry, was never an option for me. So I was extremely lucky after university that I very quickly found a very well-paid photography gig in my city. And it was amazing, because after university, where we all know we don't make a ton of money, so all of a sudden I was making money, I had a regular income, and it was much more than I would hope for that I would earn in the beginning of my career. I invest a lot of this money traveling, so that's what it was around the time 7.5 years ago, where I got this job, and I used my off times to travel to, I don't know, Cape Town. I went to LA a couple of times. And so I built my portfolio, and I also pushed my portfolio with this international vibe to it that I think is very important, and that also helped me stand out in the beginning. But the thing that you have to keep in mind, if you have a relatively stable freelance position, that it could be over any time. And this is basically what happened to me, because the client was like, okay, we're moving our production to London, so we don't need you tomorrow. I was like, okay, that may be a problem, because there weren't too many options of photography gigs that would pay as well as this job was. So I was like, okay, how am I going to make money quickly? So my partner at the time was like, why don't you do retouching? I was doing retouching a little bit for her, because she was also a photographer, and of course for my work all the time. But it would have never dawned on me that I could be a full-time retoucher. I was like, okay, I mean, I could try it, because it would be much easier contacting people on the internet and be like, hey, I'm a retoucher, I don't have to travel, and I could basically work from home. So I tried that. And it was working, but it also wasn't working overnight. So I think it took me about a year to be financially stable again and to afford the lifestyle I developed earlier with this photography gig. And I had help from my savings and from my partner, so that made it a little bit easier. But still, the point I'm trying to make is be flexible in your career choice if you have the skill set for it. So I wouldn't go into the creative industry and be like, I want to be laser focused on being, I don't know, world's best graphic designer. I mean, you could, of course, do that. If there's something you're like insanely passionate about, then that's perfectly fine. But be open to opportunities that arise. And if there's a door opening somewhere that could enable you to do something different, but also enables you to have a career, you could still do the thing that you love on the side, and maybe start out with making money this way, especially if you're on the beginning and you just have to make money somehow. All right, let's talk about pricing. Just give me 1 second. What I will not do is tell you what you should charge. And this is very focused on retouching, but I think it can be applicable to all other sorts of things and rates and all of that. And the reason I don't give you any pricing that I charge is because there's so many factors involved in finding your own rate. It's about your skill level, your experience, your portfolio. Unfortunately, also the names in your portfolio, which is something I personally hate, because I would love to show people the things that I love in my portfolio, like my favorite images. But what most people are attracted to are big names. So like big brands, or for me, it's magazine covers, even though I don't care as much for magazines, but the name Vogue or, I don't know, L'Officiel still has a ring to it, even though I'm not particularly very much into magazines, but that's just the way of the industry. And then it's also very much dependent on where you live. Do you have kids? Do you have to take care of a family? Do you have a partner that could help you? So what I would recommend in the beginning, do your research in your country or in your area, and try to find out what people that are employed in kind of the same background as you are in are making. Then put your expenses on one side: healthcare, tax, rent, your gear, savings, and of course food. We all have to eat, and a fully filled fridge is always a good thing. And then I would also add a generous amount on top of that for all the things that you want to do in life, because you don't want to just work and live in your apartment. You also want to go out. Maybe you want to go on vacation, or maybe you want to buy nice things. And then try to break it down to a day rate or an hourly rate. And remember to compensate for the fact that as a freelancer, you're probably not working 5, 6, 7 days a week, 4 weeks a month, and 12 months a year. So you also have to keep that in mind. That especially when it's project-based, there could be that you're working 3 weeks every day, 12 hours, and then you have 2 weeks where you're basically doing nothing. So you should keep that in mind as well. And try to find a rate somewhere with all these things that enable you to live, to afford your stuff, and that you also could live with. And again, everything is a process. So you may not start out with so much room to have savings, so much room to buy nice things. But it's always good to have a goal where you want to be at some point in your career of the rate you want to charge. And also, for example, for me, at some point, I had the luxury to up my rate, because I actually had so many clients that I could be choosy. And if I had a new client, I would up my rate a little bit, even though it was way more than I maybe would charge another client that I was working with for 5 years. But I was at the point where I was stable and where I was successful financially. And then if that new client would take that higher rate, then it's fine. If not, I'm still fine. So that's also a process of going about it. What you shouldn't do is, or what you have to keep in mind, that upping rates with the same client over the years almost never works. So within the first, I would say, 2 or 3 years of being a professional retoucher, my client base changed completely. Even though I had a few long-term clients, as soon as I was like, okay, I'm having more experience, I have bigger names in my portfolio, and I can charge more because my time is worth more than it was maybe 2 years ago. You will probably lose that client. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because basically you outgrow your client. Maybe it's just like a small business that doesn't have the funds to afford you anymore. And that's also fine, because there were other retouchers coming after you that were also, maybe they were starting out and also have that rate that you had before. And so you're basically moving up the ladder, I would say, in your profession. And one thing, like one mistake I made, maybe not a mistake, I mean, we're all doing it and I'm still doing it, but a thing maybe that you have to be very careful with is giving people a cheaper rate because you really want that client. I mean, I totally get it. Sometimes I often do this if I'm not doing it often anymore, but in the beginning I did it because I wanted their name in my portfolio. But then if you want their name in your portfolio, they're probably a big client and they can afford a proper rate that is the standard for the industry. But maybe it's a magazine thing, maybe it's a collaboration, and I wouldn't say that you shouldn't do it in general. I would just keep it to the absolute necessary minimum. Or, for example, I know photographers that do one job per year where they're like, okay, I don't care what you're paying me. If I want to do it, I do it, like a pro bono situation. You could think about it this way, so that you're like, okay, maybe once every 6 months, I do something that I really like just because I want to have it in my portfolio. But still, always try to remember that you want to be a professional and you want people to have respect for the hours you put into your work. And if they get it for free, it's sometimes, at least that's my experience, then you're missing this respect for your craft and for your work. And I think we still have, especially on the retouching side of things, I always feel like, because people don't really know what is happening, they think it's a very quick thing to do. And basically you're just opening Photoshop. And I mean, you got Instagram filters these days that do kind of a good job and making people look good. But of course, it's not the same than what a professional retoucher is doing to a beauty shot, for example. So respect and the worth of your work is always validated by the rate you put out there. And also, you have to remember that you also have a responsibility for the market. So, for example, you're in a situation where your dad is buying you a laptop and you're working the first years of your freelancing career in your parents' basement. Okay, I see my camera is just doing weird things. Let's just fix that in a second. I'm very sorry about that, guys. But yeah, we're back.
That's okay. It's the age of technology.
Yeah, exactly. It's that's why I'm a retoucher, not a professional streamer. So yeah, imagine the situation. You got all the tech that you can imagine to do your job from your parents, or maybe from your grandma or whatever, and you're living in your parents' basement. So you don't have a lot of expenses, which would theoretically enable you to offer cheaper rates to clients, because you don't need to take care of so many other things. But also, you are destroying the market for everybody else who is like really struggling, because they are living in a flat, they have to buy everything themselves. And so you should always keep that in mind, because you might end up in this situation as well. For example, after working from your parents' basement, I don't know if this example makes sense, but it's just what came to my mind. After 5 years, maybe you want to move out and want to have your own place. And all of a sudden you're in the situation that you're like, oh shit, the rate I was charging isn't enough to afford my rent. So always keep that in mind as well. The next point I want to talk about is gear. But before I do, let me just have a sip of water. Gear is a very tricky thing to talk about, because I get a lot of these questions where people are, do I need to buy this super expensive Wacom Cintiq to get into retouching? Or what do I need to get into retouching? What do I have to buy, and why is it also expensive? And the truth is that I was starting out with the most basic laptop that you can imagine. I didn't even know what CPU was in there. Excuse me. It wasn't very powerful. And also, I think back in the day, I got a Wacom Bamboo for, it might have been $50 or something. And that's perfectly fine in the beginning, because Photoshop basically runs on everything. And all that you need in the beginning is some form of digital pen input. So even the most basic starter thing will enable you to create right away. Because when you're like, okay, I'm feeling creative and I wanted to start something, maybe you're in training or in university and you're like, okay, I want to try this. But then you go online and see, oh my God, and Wacom Intuos Pro is like several $100s. And I don't know, people still think MacBook Pros are the way to go about it, and they are super crazy expensive. And you're like, oh shit, I can only afford this in about a year. And so you're basically spending the next year saving and not creating. So I would say it's much more important to get whatever you can afford at the time and start creating right away, especially when you're in the beginning. It will probably not be the most amazing work experience that you can imagine, but then again, you're just starting out, so you don't know what the most amazing work experience ever is. So when you're getting into freelancing, I would go about it the way that I would get the absolute minimum that you can afford without breaking the bank. And it's more about improvising in the beginning than investing. I mean, I'm as guilty with wanting more stuff as anybody else. When I was just working out, I saw all these Cintiqs from Wacom, the 27 inches, and I'm like, oh my God, I want this. But I couldn't afford it, so I wasn't able to get it. And then as soon as I'm starting my business and my business was growing and I got more successful like every year, then all of a sudden you're in a situation where your rent is taken care of, where your taxes are taken care of, where your income is very stable. And then you can think about making your work experience nice. And this is why I got all this stuff in the background. And I know that this is a very easy thing for me to say, but everything that you can see behind me, I collected over years. I got my reference screen, I don't know, 6 years ago. My Cintiq is from, I think, 2 years ago. So it's not like I went out and bought all of this at the same time. It's, again, as everything I was telling you about, everything is a process, especially when you're building your career. And so is the gear you're using. I'm using the setup I have behind me because I have the luxury of making my workspace nice. I have taken care of everything else, and I can think about how can I make my workspace more ergonomic. And this is where things like the Cintiqs come in, or a faster PC, because in the end, a faster PC means you can do more work in the same time. But in the beginning, you can easily compensate with that with something that is free and that is your time. So improvise in the beginning, and as soon as you have money left to spend on things, then you can start getting the things you want. And before that, you should really focus on the stuff you need to get your job done. I think I'm running a little bit out of time, but
we have all the time, don't worry.
Okay, I just heard that we have all the time. Okay, now let's get into self-marketing and actually how to get your first jobs. And I think when you're starting your business, it's very important to think about what you want to offer as a service, of course. And you have to decide where you position yourself. Do you want to be somebody who is specialized in things? For example, will you be the best retoucher for food photography? This is something you can, of course, do, but you can also be a jack of all trades, which is a little bit what I'm doing. So I'm doing, even though my work is focused on beauty, fashion, and advertising, I still did product, I still did food, and everything in between. So I would never say no to a job because it's something I'm not that familiar with, and I'm having fun with everything. But of course, you could also find your niche and become the best at it. So that's just something that you have to keep in mind, and you may want to decide for yourself. But then again, it's also something that may happen organically. So for example, I think my work is associated with high-end retouching, and I think nobody ever should go out and be like, I'm going to be a high-end retoucher. I mean, you can dream about it and you can think about it and you may set this as your goal, but it's something that will just happen to you eventually through the quality of work you're putting out there and through your client base. So just keep that in mind. And in the beginning, the most easiest thing is to contact your clients via email. That's what I did basically, and that's how I got my client base at the moment. So I actually never called anybody. I rarely go to studios and introduce myself personally. So yeah, I just wrote hundreds of emails in the beginning, and which can be quite frustrating because if you're writing 100 emails, you will get no replies for 80 of them. You will get declines from 15 of them. From the 5 that are left and are interested, 3 will not be able to pay your rate, and 2 may end up being potential clients. So that's about the success rate we're talking about. So you have to put in a lot of time in the beginning to actually try to find clients. What you also have to keep in mind when you're growing your business is to make it sustainable. Because, for example, if you just have one good year and then you have no work after that, it isn't doing you any good. You should always plan long-term with your clients. So I always like it to work with the same people again and again. Again, this is something that's just happening when you're professional, when you're doing good work and all of that stuff. But this sustainable aspect of your business is, of course, very easy to say when you already have it. But there is no blueprint how to do it. The only thing you can do is try to build a relationship with your client. So I'm with my long-term clients, I always exchange like also basic emails about how you're doing, thanks for the work during the past year, and all of that stuff. So it's as with everything in life, it's about building a relationship. And something that has to come prior to actually contacting people via the internet is that you actually need to have something to present yourself with, which is, of course, your portfolio. The mistake I feel like a lot of people are making is that they're overspending the time on building a web page, for example. And I can tell you my website is the most basic Adobe portfolio website that you can imagine. It's just a header build, a header picture, and just a couple of random projects that I really like, and then I did some name dropping on it as well. And it cost me maybe like 2 hours to put it together. So unless you're a web designer, make it look good, but make it efficient. You're not getting paid for putting a portfolio together. You're getting paid by the jobs you're getting with that portfolio or with that website present. So what I'm doing, I just always include a link, because with this day and age, clicking on links in an email is much easier than to have to download a PDF. Maybe PDFs don't go through because of some firewalls in some companies. So for me, that is the easiest way to go about it. And actually, I don't think like CVs and all that stuff are necessary when you're introducing yourself as a freelancer, because people only care about your work. So if you have a degree or not, nobody ever asked me if I have a degree. So I don't think it's that important. Just put your best work on there, even if it's just not that much, and just present yourself with that. And then the next question is, how do you get that portfolio, especially in the beginning? I think this is this is also the time where experimenting at university or starting freelancing on the side during university comes in. Again, I was very lucky in the beginning that when I was starting out, I met a photographer who was about in the same position as I was as a retoucher. So we kind of started growing together. And this is my number one advice I would give to people. Find maybe 1 or 2 people that are in the same position as you. For a retoucher, that could mean, of course, getting to know a photographer, maybe a makeup artist, or even a stylist. And then you could start collaborating and building each other's portfolio together. That's what I did with a stylist in the beginning when I was studying. He was working at a makeup academy, and he was like, I actually had a gig there, and he was like, would you be open to try a few fashion things and all of that stuff? I was like, yeah, sure. And so I met like makeup artists and models, and I just got material for my portfolio. And this is, I would say, the best thing of going about it, because you're all in the same position, so you can all benefit from each other. And then if your work is like really good, or even a little bit more advanced than what you're working on, like with your paid gigs, that you could also start contacting people that are a little bit ahead in the industry and ask them for test files, or maybe they just want to give you a chance and maybe give you practice files. But again, you should be keeping in mind that you also want to be a professional. You want people to see you as a professional artist, which is doing work that is worth spending money on it. So I would be very selective about the people I contact, because if you're like, I don't know, write to a few hundred people on Instagram that you want test files, you will always just be the one asking for test files and not the professional artist you want to be, because they will pay you. So also be very mindful about that. And now let's talk about social media. I have a very, I wouldn't call it a love and hate relationship with social media, but the amount of jobs I got, like the amount of paid jobs I got directly through social media, you can count on like these two hands over the past 7 years. So I don't really use social media to generate income. I use it in a way that I want to create a buzz and that I want people to know me and know my work. I mean, of course, you never know, for example, if somebody drops you an email, maybe they have seen your work on social media. So it's very hard to distinguish these two things. But I rarely get a message on Instagram, like DM or whatever, and this will lead into a business opportunity. It is very rare. So, of course, it is very important to take social media into account. My camera is doing weird things again. Just give me 1 second. And again, this shows you that we are live and we're not faking anything. And that we're all just real people. Yes, so there are... Oh, hold on, my camera's not working. Let me try to fix it. I'm having some technical difficulties with my camera. So Ono, if you could maybe take over for a few short minutes. I try to fix it as soon as I can.
No problem. And we promise this is not a guerrilla marketing. This is just a small technical glitch. But so far, keeping an eye on the chat and all the conversations going on, there was a question about the test files, that what those test files are. Those are the test shots. And then let's take a look. In general, we are taking a note of your questions. There were a couple of questions. Oh, yay, Wacom-related questions. Those I can answer. Some questions about the licenses that comes with Wacom. If you go to your Wacom ID, right now, most of our products have certain software offers. Just check out if you and your product is eligible for one of those offers. Then you can use a wide variety of those apps that we currently have on offer. Most of our products have like Clip Studio Paints, and also some other software as well. And yes, these videos that you can rewatch later on YouTube, except for the following session with Loish and also the portfolio review, those will be live viewing only. They will not be released after the event is over, but everything else, we will publish those videos on our YouTube channel during next week. Couldn't have perfect timing. Welcome back.
I'm very sorry about this, guys. But again,
it happens all the time.
It wouldn't be live if there is, yeah, it wouldn't be live if something wouldn't go wrong. So, where have we been? Social media. Yeah, the thing we all love. Yeah, of course it is important these days to have a social media presence. But at the same time, just as an example, one of my best clients or my highest paying clients is a photographer who has like 50 Instagram followers. So it isn't everything that counts. And what you should keep in mind is that when you're starting out and creating content on social media, this is not your job. This is not what put food in your fridge. It's not what pays your rent. What pays your rent is being a retoucher. So you should be very careful with allocating time to social media. And then, I mean, if you're really into it, you can, of course, do it. I mean, nobody's stopping you, but be prepared to, it's a lot of work to do social media properly. For example, in my case, I retouch a lot of my personal images, sometimes solely for practice reasons and for social media, of course. So throughout the week, I would say I edit like 5 or 6 images for social media that take me about 1 or 2 hours. So you can see how like just doing this work for social media can add up. And this comes on top of the work you're actually getting paid for. So just a little bit of food for thought that social media isn't everything. In my case, these days, with the community I was lucky to have, or I am lucky to have, I try to keep my social media like 50-50. I have about 50% of it is my work, the work that I like, my personal stuff that I'm very passionate about, and that I also use to create this buzz around my company or around my brand. And the other part is that I was thinking about how to give back to the community I've built. And since, if you know me, you know I'm not very into tutorials or retouching tutorials. So I was trying to find a way to engage with my community and give back to my community. And I do that through all my tech content, where I test stuff that is important for us creators. For example, displays, or lately a lot of laptops and all of that stuff. It's something I'm very passionate about. And even though I just told you that gear isn't everything, especially if you're a creative professional, it is still very important. And there's just so much out there that I hope that the insight that I am offering will help people that follow me to make an informed purchase decision. So that's how I try to give back to the community I built. And I also like to talk about tech stuff. So it's cool to hang out with people on my social media and talk about gear and be a little bit nerdy. So that's what I like about social media and the way you can connect with people. And of course, social media is also giving it the opportunity to collaborate with different people. May it be brands, may it be, for example, if you're a retoucher, with photographers, or like, for example, in my case, with Wacom, with what I'm doing right now. These are all things that are basically enabled through social media. So doing it for this sake is also, I would say, a very good idea, because again, it could create this presence where people find you that wouldn't have otherwise know about you. And of course, this can help grow your business as well. But again, you probably in the beginning or for a very long time will not make money directly through social media. And this is just something that you should keep in mind. But where was I going with this? And of course, again, everything is a process. So if you see these people getting, for example, like big names in the industry, being able to test tech for free, or maybe even get paid for testing stuff and all of this is because they put in years of hard work into the social media. And again, there is no shortcut. So you often may get these when you're starting out and you're a retoucher, for example. I get this quite a lot. People asking me, do you want to edit this editorial because it will be in this and this magazine? Or I have personal work and I will tag you on it. I did it in the past and it never did anything for me, because what you have to understand, for example, if you're contacted by a model that has 500,000 followers or something, just like a random number, or like has a lot more followers than you have, chances are that the people that follow her aren't really interested in retouching. So they will not click on your tag. So I would be very careful and very selective about taking these kinds of deals. I mean, of course, it can help you, again, create this buzz around you, but you have to do your research about the people and the kind of people that follow the people you're working with. So it's just something that you have to keep in mind when it comes to social media, and something that I learned throughout the years of doing social media, which again is like 7 years by now. Now I'm almost to the end of my talk, and it's something that I think is very important that I want to talk about in the end, and this is work-life balance. I think the topic of mental health and self-care is almost everywhere on social media these days, but it's almost never related to work. And we as freelancers, we don't have any fixed working hours. We don't have any fixed break times. So we end up working a lot. And especially in the beginning, you work a lot without immediately reaping the benefits of it. For example, if you're employed, you get your paycheck at the end of the month or the beginning of the month or whatever. And when you're starting out as a freelancer, it can take quite a while until you get paid. And maybe you get paid later or like a lot later, which also happens a lot. So you will put in a lot of time into your career, and you'll probably not be done with 8 hours a day. So it is very important to, again, think about making your business sustainable. Again, this is something that I have the luxury of thinking about because I have a very stable client base and I'm also doing it for quite a while. But it's still something that should be in the back of your head all the time, because when you are a freelancer, the biggest asset you have is yourself. So if you wear down yourself, or if you're burned out because you're working 16 hours a day, then it's very hard to build a successful, sustainable business. And it's also very hard to keep the joy in creating, which was the thing that actually got you into creative industry. So, for example, my best year in terms of money was 2017. Especially the end of 2017, I had a very big retouching gig, and I also had a lot of work from my other retouching clients. But it all came at the same time. So I was working 16 to 18 hours for weeks, if not months. And it started to affect my personal life. It started to affect my health because I was always exhausted. I was barely getting any sleep. And it also affected me physically, of course, because if you don't get sleep for a very long time, then it's not very good for your body. So you have to keep in mind that all the money in your bank account isn't worth anything if you're always just working and if you can't enjoy things in life, like going on vacation, all of that stuff. But at the same time, cutting down on the work you get means basically saying no to jobs, which basically, again, means saying no to money. And this is something that I learned the hard way throughout 2017, but that made my life as a freelancer so much more enjoyable, and also made it in a way that I could see myself doing what I'm doing for the next 10 to 20 years. So just always keep that in mind, that you sometimes just have to say no for your own sake, because you may earn a little bit more money if you take that job, but maybe you maybe it affects your relationship with your partner, or maybe you miss something because maybe you have a family and you miss, I don't know, your daughter's birthday, whatever. It's just like an example, and I hope you get what I mean. And so always keep that in mind, to take care of yourself as a freelancer, and your mental health and this self-care thing is as important in work as it is in life. Yeah, just to wrap things up, I talked a lot about flexibility, which I think is still one of the most important things, and being professional. The flexibility, I mean, I'm not set on doing retouching for the rest of my days. So I always try to find new things to do, new things to offer to my clients, and also to keep me fresh creatively. Because if you're doing the same thing over and over again, which is what you're basically doing when you're retouching, just the images change, but the workflow is almost the same all the time. So I like to learn new things just to keep my creative mind fresh. For example, for me right now, that's video editing and doing tech videos and all of that stuff. So try to find something that you're passionate about and try to incorporate it into your work. And maybe you will not be able to generate more income with it, but maybe it's just something you enjoy and makes you enjoy your regular job in the creative industry more. And of course, always have a plan B. This doesn't mean that you, for example, if you can't be a retoucher tomorrow, this doesn't mean that you immediately have something else to do, but be flexible in your mind to accept change when it happens, and be ready that maybe something changes and that you have to do something else. Maybe you hurt yourself, or maybe, I don't know, there's so many reasons. And as I explained to you, I never started in the creative industry with thinking about becoming a retoucher. It was just a long road and different things, people I've met, things I've learned that made me end up in retouching. And I love retouching, but who knows, maybe I'm doing something else next year. And I think this flexibility, this mindset is very important. And then again, as important as hardware, software, and techniques and skills are, in the end, it all comes down to you, because you are the person behind the screen that actually is doing the creative part. And this is the most important part. And with these words, I'm at the end of my notes, basically. And if we still have time, I would think we could do a little bit of Q&A.
Absolutely, we have time. And thank you so much, Alex. That was really great. That was such an insightful speech and very good points you voiced. I think I personally took for myself that the voice in your head is always trying to convince you to do things that might not be the best one for you. So
yeah, very true.
In that case, it's really important to have a perspective, to keep that flexibility. So thank you for that. And actually, we have received tons of questions from our audience. So I will start from the beginning, and step by step we can meet in the end again. So one of the first questions we have received, when you were talking about that you're traveling, you have the option of traveling around the world, especially before the whole pandemic situation. And we also see this amazing setup behind you. So how does it work when you're traveling with all those equipment? Are you keeping some core essentials, or you get a setup getting ready in that location by your clients? How does it work with the gear and traveling?
It varies. It always depends on the job and the kind of traveling I'm doing. For example, as I mentioned, I'm often doing these longer trips with a business partner of mine who is a photographer. And for example, we would stay about 1 or 2 months in LA. So I didn't get, so there's no client that there's no one client that would provide maybe a reference screen or maybe some basic tech. So I would often look at it the way, for example, when we book Airbnbs for these trips, I would always look for, is there a desk that is big enough to accommodate my laptop and whichever Wacom I'm using. And then I used to travel with a laptop and a Mobile Studio Pro. The thing with that is a laptop and a Mobile Studio combined will put you at risk of people shouting at you at airports because it's over 8 kg that you are allowed to put in your hand luggage. So there are a lot of things to consider when you're traveling as a digital artist. So nowadays I just have my laptop and my Intuos Pro, whatever size is fitting my backpack. It's mostly an S or an M. And then thankfully laptops these days have very good displays, so you don't necessarily need a reference display like I have behind me. Of course, this is the ideal situation I like to work. I do my best work here. It's where I can work the longest hours. But if I have to, I could work on a laptop with an Intuos, and you wouldn't be able to see any different in the quality of my work. So again, this is the flexibility and the way to build your setup and get comfortable with almost everything of like all kinds of tech that you can use. And then, of course, if you're booked in a studio, for example, I have a photographer in Munich who likes to book me in the studio to have just shorter, how do you say, shorter lines of communication and being able to sit in front of a screen together. They would provide me with a reference screen, and again, I would only bring my laptop and whatever Wacom tech I need to get the job done. So these are these two things I'm dealing with throughout the year.
You had very, very good points about the pricing and also developing a relationship with the clients, and probably that was the topic where we received most of the questions. One of them that popped up was, how do you negotiate and agree with the clients about pricing? Like when they're asking for a cheap price, do you go like, okay, I will do it for this price for this time, but from the next one on, my flat price is that X? Or do you always keep a firm stand in front of them?
That changed throughout my career because, as I said, doing the thing that you just mentioned and being like, okay, this time it's this and that, but next time you have to pay me fully. And I wouldn't say never, because you should never say never, but I can't remember a situation where that worked, because in the end they would just go to somebody else doing it for even cheaper, or will be like, but the last time you did it for this and that, so surely it's possible to do it again. So it will put you on a very tough negotiation standpoint. And I learned a lot about this during the time I had to transition from photography to retouching, because I wasn't making any money. So I was ready to jump on any opportunity I could get where somebody was interested in me doing the retouching. But thank God I had a partner at this time who was like, no, you're underselling yourself. And she was basically that voice in my head that was like, your work is worth more. And there will be people that will appreciate the quality of work you're doing and who are ready to pay what your work is worth. And so I know this is such a tough spot, and I can totally understand people that are struggling with this, because in the end, you're again saying no to money, and maybe you're like, okay, maybe I take that reduced rate, but then again, I could at least, this camera is driving me nuts. Sorry about that.
Stealing the scene every opportunity.
Yeah. So you're basically saying no to money, and you're like, okay, when I do this job now, I at least have something in my fridge. But you should always think about that there will definitely be a client who are like, okay, I'm paying you your rate that may be triple what this other person was offering you. So you only have to work a third of the time to get the same amount of money, which means you can potentially make so much more money. And be prepared. There will be tough weeks and months and all of that throughout your career, especially in the beginning when you're building a business, because you don't have a lot of savings, of course, because where should you get them? But you should always keep all of that stuff in mind. And what I'm doing these days when somebody is asking for a ridiculous rate, unfortunately, a lot of photographers are funnily doing it. And I'm like, I can't do retouching for a couple of bucks. And then you wouldn't go out and take a picture of a couple of bucks. Because I think it's, again, this thing of appreciating digital work and digital art. It's a craft. It's not something that you do with a click here and there and doing a couple of filters in Photoshop. It's really something you do with your hand, and with that aesthetic understanding that you have developed throughout years of experimenting and trying things and all of that. And this is worth so much, and you should never undersell yourself if you can somehow afford it. I mean, of course, I'm very flexible with my rates. If somebody is like, okay, I have this is your rate, but I only have this budget. Can we meet in the middle? Then I'm like, okay, maybe it's not my best quality of work. Maybe you're just getting 80% of it because you're only paying 80% of it. Or are you flexible with your timeline? For example, if you can only afford this rate, is it cool if it's done in 4 weeks instead of next week? So there are a lot of things where you can try to balance it out. This camera. But but yeah, that's what I mean. I think there are a lot of ways to negotiate, and if somebody is totally not willing to negotiate with you, they're also not worth your time. But yeah, you have to learn to say no to things. It's a very magical word in the creative industry. Give me 1 second. Digital cameras these days. But yeah, I think that was a good ending statement to that question.
Yeah, I have last 3 questions. One is easy, 2 can be unpacked into a longer discussion, actually. So the first one is, you gave great examples about pricing and how you should calculate your base price, and also having that perspective that you are not actually undervaluing the market. What would be your recommendation in keeping that perspective, to understanding that what the standard is in the market, actually? I mean, probably it helps to have a partner who has that perspective to give that feedback. But other than that, what kind of rules would you recommend?
The thing is, I don't know what the standard is myself. So as you probably have noticed with me, I'm very cagey about giving my rate on the internet openly, because it could...
As you should.
Yes, exactly. Because there is a lot of competition, and then there are also... this camera is just... This camera is just like, it's Friday. Are we done now? So because there's a lot of competition, and also with how you, for example, on Instagram tag the people you're working with and even potential clients, there's always the risk of somebody being like, okay, I'm going to go to the client and underselling or trying to undercut clients. I mean, of course, if a client is accepting that, maybe that's not a perfect client to work with, but still it's something that you have to keep in the back of your mind. I think it comes down to always try to push for a little bit of a higher rate, I would say. So you're basically just trying to find the threshold where people will like, okay, that's ridiculous, buy, and okay, we can talk about it, and then just fine tune it from there. And again, I don't have the answers to everything. Maybe I'm even underselling myself in a commercial environment. I wouldn't know, because it's very hard to go to another retoucher and be like, hey, you worked with the same client as I do. What have you charged? And the probability of him or her being like, I charge this and that. What are you charging? Are very low, as it should be again. So I know that this isn't really an answer, but this is also a thing where there isn't really an answer. It's just like, you can try to kind of sense what is happening. And I think a good way to go about it is research hourly rates for, I don't know, a digital artist, graphic designers and all that thing, and then try to find something that you're comfortable with. I mean, if you sit down for an hour, it should be something you're comfortable with when you're creating, because nothing is worse than sitting there and being like, this stuff is not worth my time at the moment. I'm not getting enough money to sit here, because it will affect the quality of your work in the end, because you're not laser focused on your work, but you also have all these other things in mind that will in the end affect the way the work you're doing. So I know that wasn't really an answer, but then again, it's very hard to have an answer for these kinds of questions. And it's just something you learn from experience. And again, it's a process. So your rate will change a lot in the first 3 years, I would say. And yeah, I mean, in the end,
I think the process.
your
Sorry.
I think in the end, I know this is also like with my backstory, it's very easy to say because if you're underselling yourself, you will know by the end of the month if you can't pay for your rent or what's in your fridge. So then you also realize, okay, I need to charge more money or I need to find more clients. And then if you have enough clients but don't make enough money, then you're not charging enough. So this is also like it's all connected, and you will notice if you're underselling yourself, I would say.
So there are some clear signs that shows that you might be potentially underselling.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, last question, potentially big question. Motivation and consistency. It's a big topic, especially in this last year. But I believe I know it's also in general a huge topic for being a freelancer. You talked about the work-life balance and the importance of keeping things packed and separated with your real life and the work life. But in general, how do you go through pitfalls of demotivation or creative blocks, or like finding that power, that drive in you to do it day in, day out?
First of all, I think the most important part is to accept that you will never be 100% all of the time motivated to do your job. This is the same thing, no matter if you're freelancing or if you're employed. I mean, how many people go to work every day and be like, oh, I really don't want to do it, but I kind of have to show up. And it's basically the same when you're freelancing. So sometimes just sitting at home and doing nothing just isn't an option because clients are waiting for your stuff. And in general, if you're, for example, if you're talking about creative projects or personal projects, or trying new things in general, and you just don't feel it for a couple of weeks, that's also totally fine. Nobody's asking you to be creative 365 days a week. Just don't stress about it. Just leave it for a while. Go for a walk, maybe do something else, or just watch Netflix. That's totally fine to take a break from now and then. And especially, like, for example, my workday often involves stuff. For example, the advertising stuff I'm paid for, it's 70% of the time not something I'm passionate about, but it is my job and I get paid for it, which is for me motivation enough. And that's why I'm doing my creative and my personal project at the side as well. So I always try to, even if I'm very busy, I try to do a personal image every day, no matter if it's a Sunday or a Saturday. It's just because I feel like I need that kind of habit to be happy with what I'm doing. I need to know for myself that I did something nice. For example, if I'm stuck with doing online shop retouch for 2 days, for 2 weeks, where you're doing this same stuff over and over again, and it's not pretty, and you don't want anybody to see it ever again with your name associated to it. This is driving me nuts in a way that I feel like I want to do something that looks nice. And this is what helps me staying creative and also stay motivated, because I know I can still do this other thing. And if you're not feeling that, and if you're not doing it this way, that's also perfectly fine. Just find a way that works for you. There's no blueprint to be creative. And I think the most important thing is, the most important part is to understand and accept that you will not be creative every day of your life. I mean, of course, if you're just watching Netflix for half a year, then you maybe should start thinking about considering changing your daily habits and all of that stuff. But generally speaking, it's totally okay to take a break. And I think that's very important. So, for example, as a freelancer, you don't have a lot of weekends because it's sometimes you just have other days off. If you don't have any work, then your weekend might be a Monday. And I do this from time to time where I'm like, okay, I'm not even going to turn on my computer today. I will use this day just to do nothing, like nothing that is related to work. And I don't need these days often, but when I take them for myself, I really enjoy them. I love my job, but also I just sometimes need a break. And then I leave all of that stuff that's behind me and in front of me, I leave it off and just leave the house, or just, as I said, lay on the couch and do something completely different. And yeah, this is what helps me cope with everything that is sometimes in my way, or if I'm just not feeling it, I can accept that, and then it's okay for me.
Mm-hmm. Completely true. So the more we talk, the more questions we are getting, which is always a good sign. Unfortunately, this time we are actually running out of time. So I will slowly move into the closing statements, but definitely there is a lot to discuss, and you have so many great recommendations and great insights you shared with us. I expect a big chunk of our audience to come follow you on your Instagram and probably get more questions sent to your way. But yeah, so
I will take that risk. So if I haven't, I know that a lot of these situations are very specific and dependent on the individual. So if you feel like I could answer whatever question you might have, just drop me a DM on Instagram. Again, if there will be a lot of you, it might take a few days for me to answer them, but I will try to do my best to help you out with anything I was just talking about.
Thank you so much. Okay,
Sure
let's
thing.
fire up our closing slides. Yes. Well, once again, thank you, Alex. It was great, and thank you everyone for being here with us, with your questions, with your great chat. Please don't forget to follow Alex on social media, on Instagram, dgtl-craft _postproduction. And also don't forget to claim your 20% discount on Wacom Europe and UK eStore with the discount code Career20 during the checkout. Our session is continuing, so live session is ending here, but this page, this YouTube live goes on, and we will have some very cool inspirational content for you, lots of videos prepared for you. And next up at 5 p.m., we will meet here again in this link, in the same stream with Loish, and she will be talking about using social media to generate income as an artist. Well, thank you all again. See you in an hour and a half. Until then, stay creative.
Yeah. Thank you guys for listening.